Today I want to show you how to slow cook a piece of brisket in the oven using techniques we've learned in the past to mimic the wonderful smokiness, complexity and texture of an outdoor barbecue for those of us who don't have access to either outdoor or the barbecue. Let's do it. First up, the cut. Unless you're committed to cooking a whole piece of brisket, I would always go for the point cut. Just for demonstration, if you were to extend the brisket this way, the flat part of the brisket would be the flat cut. And the reason why we go for the point cut is that it's marbled with intermuscular fat. And when given time to slowly render, that's what's going to make this piece of beautiful meat extremely juicy. Now, no matter how you choose to cook your brisket, it is always beneficial to salt ahead, dry brining. Why? Well, the salt will have time to penetrate the meat, seasoning it evenly, enhancing the natural flavors of the beef. But more importantly, the salt will break down the protein fibers of the beef into smaller amino acid strands, and that's key to tenderization and moisture retention. Normally, I recommend 0.6% of the weight of whatever meat you're cooking, but today we're going for a much higher salt content. This is 1.2% of the weight of the brisket, because this is a large and dense cut of meat, and a higher salt concentration is needed to penetrate effectively. And barbecue brisket in general is a very rich dish. You almost need that much salt to stand up to the fat and the smoke that we're going to introduce later. Today we're going for the classic Texas style, so just equal parts salt and black pepper. But we're not adding the black pepper yet because they're very sensitive to moisture, and the salt would draw out the surface moisture from the beef, and that would in turn tame the taste of the black pepper. So we'll add the equal part black pepper just before cooking. It's not uncommon for indoor barbecue recipes to call for liquid smoke, but we're not going to use that because liquid smoke could only capture the water-soluble compounds, and that lacks the depth and complex mix of flavors from the interaction between the wood, the fat, and the heat. So allow me to introduce secret weapon number 1, a technique we've used previously on a piece of steak to impart umami and smoke. It's Katsuobushi, dried, shaved, smoked skipjack tuna. Very common in Japanese cooking, used for dashi making. If you ever had beef udon, tonkotsu ramen, miso soup, you would have had Katsuobushi. What this would bring to the table is a ton of umami from the inosinic acid, and this would make the surface of the beef extremely savory. B, a mild smokiness, given the tuna has been smoked over a long period of time. And with the time in the fridge, the smokiness would slowly permeate the surface of the beef, imparting some meaningful flavors and complexity, unlike the liquid smoke. And the third benefit, surface moisture. Since we've salted it quite aggressively, the salt would start drawing out moisture from the beef. Some of this moisture would be absorbed by the Katsuobushi, giving us a very dry surface when we cook this, increasing our very slim chance of achieving some sort of a bark inside the oven. And for any of you who's worried about fishiness, just think about the last ramen you've had. Have you ever left a ramen joint saying, oh my god, that is so fishy? If it's good enough for ramen, it's good enough for brisket. So 2 kilo brisket, about 40 grams of Katsuobushi. Now, we simply grab another tray, place it on top, and this goes into the fridge, ideally with a bit of weight on top to really press it together to maximize the surface contact for both the moisture absorption and flavor permeation for up to 3 days. After 3 days in the fridge, we have this beauty, and you can see how much moisture the Katsuobushi has absorbed. So now, very carefully, we scrape off the Katsuobushi using the back of a table knife. Look at how dry the surface is. And the small pieces that are almost powder-like, leave them. They will help us form the crust along with the black pepper. Once there's no visible large flake left, we're ready to complete part 2 of our Dalmatian rub. Same equal weight as the salt, which is 1.2% of the brisket. Oh my god, how long does it take? There we go. Perfect. Other side. Of course, Dalmatian is referring to the white salt and the black pepper. Because we've also introduced the Katsuobushi, this is kind of a crossbreed. Even though dry rub has the term rub in it, you're much better off pressing slightly for the essential oil of the black pepper to make contact with what is now a very dry surface. Perfect. And 1.2% should be able to saturate the surface, meaning there's nothing uncovered. Now we transfer this to our roasting tray with a cake rack on top. And to ensure the perfect airflow could start drying out the surface, we're going to add a V-rack underneath. Now for the initial cooking, the evaporation phase, we're going to cook this uncovered, fan-only function, 120 degrees Celsius. The objective of the exercise is for the surface moisture to fully evaporate. Only then we can form the crust, the bark. And because conventional home ovens could trap in the steam, every half an hour, it's important to open the oven door slightly, just for a few seconds, to let the steam out. After 5 hours, this is what we have. While this is not as photogenic as the real deal, it has everything we wanted on the surface. The Maillard reaction. Protein reacting to reducing sugar, making the meat taste meaty and complex, and very mild caramelization, deepening the flavors. And as you can see, it's firm to touch without your finger taking anything away, so the crust has set. Now, if we were to continue to cook this as is in the oven, what would happen is the moisture from the inside would continue to come to the surface and then evaporate. Similar to the effect sweat has on one's skin, it will keep cooling down the meat, taking it much longer for it to cook. In a real barbecue, this would then be wrapped one form or another to create a more humid environment for this to cook quicker, which is exactly what we're going to do today. But taking advantage of the wrapping step, we're going to introduce a different form of complex smoke by using some smoked streaky bacon. We very carefully transfer this beauty, and this is a beauty, to the bacon, and we quite tightly wrap this on top, while the Katsuobushi has given us subtle, complex smokiness that are mostly water-soluble. As this cooks, the bacon fat would start rendering, practically basting the crust we just created with fat-soluble, complex bacon smoke. And to prevent this from forming a bed of liquid at the bottom unnecessarily and not trap in too much steam, replicating the effect of butcher's paper, we're simply going to put this back on top of the rack so that while the bacon is trapping in enough steam, we have two channels at the bottom for the excess fat and the excess moisture to escape on either side. Now this beauty goes back in, same temperature for 2 to 3 hours until the core temperature is around 93 to 98 degrees Celsius. After a bit more than 2 hours, this beauty comes out and we probe. We are within the range of 93 to 98, and more importantly, when you insert the probe, there is zero, almost zero resistance. That means it's ready. We carefully unwrap the foil. Now, we very carefully remove the bacon, and they will be our breakfast tomorrow. And very carefully, we transfer this to a wire rack to rest. Cover loosely with foil for at least an hour for the muscle fibers to relax, for the temperature to even out, and the juices to redistribute. But purely for the purpose of demonstration, I just want to show you what we have achieved. Look at this beauty. And that's my indoor brisket.